I'm about 1 month into Zone 2 training when I'm running, and I really just wanted to share my experience with Zone 2, why I chose to train in Zone 2, and I really wanted to share how it's affected my running, why I chose to train in Zone 2, and any other things that I've noticed outside of running since I've been training in Zone 2. Hey there, I'm Dr. Lisa. I'm a physical therapist that helps runners prevent and treat injuries. And talking about Zone 2 gives me flashbacks to exercise physiology, which I took in undergrad when I majored in exercise science. Talking about Zone 2 gives me flashbacks to when I took exercise physiology in undergrad when I majored in exercise science. And it's not something that I remember to a T, or else I probably would have started training in Zone 2 a long time ago. I've been running now for about 5 to 6 years. So I would think if I learned about it, I would probably implement it, but maybe I was just thinking about other things at that time. But flash forward, we're about 6 years into my running journey, and I ran a 10K about a little over a month ago at this point, and my 10K was not something that I ran at max speed. I had just been coming back from a hip injury, and I just wanted to really go out there, run pain-free, and also my goal was to have a similar split for each mile. And I was able to accomplish that. But one thing I noticed was that my heart rate was very, very high. And when I started looking at the data inside the Apple Watch app, I noticed that my heart rate was not only high for my pace at that race, but also my easier runs, because at that point I hadn't really been doing any speed work. Like I said, I was coming back from an injury, so I hadn't done much speed work at all. So I was just looking at my easy pace, which was supposed to be my easy runs, and my heart rate was still pretty stinking high. Now I'm 29 years old, so if I looked at my max heart rate, just doing a simple equation, 220 minus my age, it would lead me about 191 beats per minute for my max heart rate. Now, my runs, just to give you a little bit of insight, for an easy pace was around 170 to 180. Yes, it's very high. And when I really looked back into my data in my Apple Watch, I noticed that it started spiking after I got COVID last summer. So when I got COVID last summer, I didn't necessarily have a lot of side effects. I just knew my endurance was shot because I was pretty much just tired. It was kind of like a common cold for me that I was able to get over pretty quickly. But my endurance and my heart rate my endurance was really, really bad because I took some time off, but my heart rate would just spike up after even like a very slow, easy run. And I thought that that would go away quickly because maybe my endurance was just low, but it has stayed around. It's stuck around for about 8 months at this point. So that's clearly something that I need to work on. And COVID didn't really affect my resting heart rate. It's still in the low 40s. It's about 42 to 45 beats per minute. And now it's jumping up to 170 to 180 beats per minute, which is pretty much zone 4, zone 5 for all of my runs. And that's not effective. That's definitely not going to help my running. That's not going to help my heart. So something needs to change. So I looked into zone 2, and I knew this is exactly what I had to do in order to, one, increase my aerobic base, improve my heart function, and prevent anything from happening to me while I was running, because it's about to get super hot. So I can't imagine if I was running every single run at about 170, 180 in the heat with the humidity here in Virginia. And when I really dug into the research for Zone 2, I couldn't help but think, why have I not been doing this for years and years? I've always heard of the 80-20 running, and I've heard of you should be running easy at a slow pace, but a slow pace is a perspective. I could run, 2 minutes slower than my race pace, and that's a slow pace, or I could run 3.5 minutes slower than my race pace, and that's also a slow pace. So slow is not necessarily the best guidelines for how slow your easy runs really should be. So in terms of the 80-20, my goal was 80% of my runs would be in zone 2, 20% would be more speed work. So I basically calculated that down. I'm doing about 1 day of speed work and 3 days of zone 2 running. And I know that's not perfectly adding up to the 80-20, but with my speed workouts, I'm making sure that I'm doing 1 mile warm up and 1 mile cool down in that zone 2. So when I started working in zone 2, I was like, I'm just gonna go for a run. I'm not gonna look at my pace. I'm just gonna look at my heart rate. And of course I looked at my pace on the first run because I was curious, and it was extremely frustrating. So if you're trying to run in zone 2, I totally feel you. This is a very humbling experience. I feel like I'm just like, oh, every time my heart rate increases. And really for me, I just knew I have to do this. Like there's no, oh, let me just speed up and just say, screw it. I knew I had to do this for the sake of my body, for the sake of also wanting to run for years and years to come. So in terms of where my pace was for the first week in zone 2 compared to my race pace, which again was not full out, it was just a steady, faster pace. So my first week in zone 2 was about 3 minutes and 30 seconds slower than my race pace. And that included some walk runs, or I should say jog, because if my heart rate spiked up, I would just walk and bring it back down. Now, the way I calculated zone 2, it's about 60 to 70% of your heart rate max. So for me, I was looking at about 135 to 140 beats per minute. So anything above, like if it just suddenly jumped up to 155 beats per minute, that's when I would walk, bring it back down to 135, and then start jogging again. And that was very difficult. In terms of my running schedule for zone 2, besides the speed workout, I was running based on time, not distance. I knew if I was running for distance, it was going to take me a very long time. So I basically broke it up into one 40-minute run, one 50-minute run, and one 60-minute run for the first month. And then after that first month, going into the next month, I'm gonna increase that 60-minute into basically 70-minute and then 80-minute, just to keep increasing my endurance. With the whole goal being not even really paying attention to pace and only focusing on heart rate. Now keep in mind, your running watch might not be 100% accurate with your heart rate. It might be 3 to 5 beats per minute off, but just to get a ballpark idea of where you're at, I think it's perfectly fine to just use your running watch to measure your heart rate. So after I did some research, I came across all these benefits of zone 2, and I wanna read some off to you just in case you're skeptical of zone 2. So the first one is you'll increase your aerobic base. The next one, you'll increase your performance. You'll be able to run faster during your speed workouts. You'll also have more mitochondria, which maybe you remember that word from science class in elementary school. But basically, this mitochondria plays a very big role. Now it's at a cellular level, but it plays a very big role in how your heart functions and how your body functions. An increase in mitochondria is actually linked to decreasing your risk for diabetes, and it has everything to do with how it's producing insulin. So that's kind of beyond my scope, so I'll just leave it there. And then also in zone 2, you're burning fat, and in zone 4 or 5, when your heart rate's higher, you're burning glucose. And I thought this was really interesting because I remember when I was training for my half marathons and I increased my base mileage each week, and I just remember craving at night sugar, like an ungodly amount of sugar that I wouldn't normally eat. And I just thought it was part of the training process. I had no clue what to think. I was just listening to what my body wanted. And now looking back, it makes so much sense, because if I'm just burning through this glucose in zone 4 and 5 for every run, my body is going to want to replenish that glucose with sugar and starches like carbs. But if I was training in zone 2, I wouldn't be having that craving. So it's been a month since I've been in zone 2, and I have noticed that I don't crave sugar as much and I know my base mileage isn't as high, but just in general, I'm not craving sugar as much, which I find pretty darn interesting how that links to what you're craving. So let me give you some tips to train in zone 2. And I think the whole idea behind zone 2 is that yes, my pace right now for zone 2 is pretty high, but once I can improve my heart's function, improve my aerobic base, my pace will start to lower as my heart rate still stays in zone 2. So I'm not gonna be at that super slow pace for myself throughout this entire training. My goal is decrease my pace as my heart rate stays the same in zone 2. So if you're thinking about training in zone 2, I highly encourage you to do so, especially if you're thinking about training for a race later on, maybe in the fall. This is a great time to start because you need about 3 to 4 months to really train in zone 2 to make sure you have that base down. So if you're thinking about training in zone 2, one tip I have for you is to train based on time, not distance. Distance is going to make you frustrated. It's going to take a lot longer. So I want you to focus more on the time that you're training. So say I'm gonna go out for a 40-minute run today. I'm gonna go out for a 50-minute run today versus a 5-mile run or a 4-mile run. The second tip I have for you is to just don't even pay attention to your pace, especially while you're running and when you're in the first couple weeks of zone 2 training. You are going to be frustrated. I'll tell you right now, you're going to be frustrated. You're also going to be probably annoyed. I know I was annoyed. I was thinking, oh my gosh, I just walked and now I have to walk again. And I never walk during my runs and blah, blah, blah. Just really beating myself up about it. But the truth is, your pace doesn't matter. Your priority is your heart rate, not your pace right now. Your pace will come. It's just part of the training. It's part of the journey. My third tip for you is to be patient. The first week is the hardest. Just like with anything new, your body might not be used to that pace that you have to run at because maybe you've never run that pace before, and that's okay. Your body's gonna get used to it. It's gonna sink into that pace, and it's going to take some time, but your body will eventually get used to it. Be patient with your heart rate. I know for me, especially in week 3 and 4, it was almost like I had a really good run for one of my runs where my pace was actually pretty low. And I was like, yes, this is working. And then the next run, it was back up to like 3 minutes slower than my race pace. So your heart rate's gonna depend a lot on a couple different factors, like the time of day that you're running, the weather, the humidity, the caffeine consumption, and even stress and what you ate before you ran. So there's all these different factors. So you're just looking for patterns over a chunk of time, not necessarily week after week after week, because again, all these things are happening on a cellular level. You're training your heart because it is a muscle, so you have to keep going with it and stay consistent with it. If you were contemplating zone 2 training, I hope this was helpful. I also am diving more into my zone 2 training on my podcast, Rehab for Runners, if you want to check that out as well.